The morning had begun like any other at the Jefferson County Courthouse in Colorado. The weather was dry, the docket was packed, and Judge Mark Ramsey was known for running a strict, no-nonsense courtroom. People filed in, including journalists, attorneys, and court staff. Among them sat Nathan Calloway, a high-profile drug trafficker in his mid-30s who was finally facing sentencing. After months of a dragged-out trial, Calloway, dressed in an expensive gray suit despite being in custody, looked unusually confident for someone convicted on 5 felony charges. His smirk unsettled the assistant DA, Caroline Blake, who sat across from him. She'd worked tirelessly to secure his conviction, and now she was just hoping the judge would hand down the maximum sentence. Outside the courthouse, K-9 officer Travis Daniels stood next to his German Shepherd partner, Rex. Daniels and Rex were finishing up a routine perimeter check. Rex, a 6-year-old police dog with a perfect detection record, had been with Daniels for 3 years. He was calm, well-trained, and not prone to reacting without cause. But today, everything changed. As Daniels made a slow pass near the main entrance, Rex suddenly froze, his nose twitched, tail stiffening. Without warning, he jerked the leash from Daniels' grip and bolted toward the building. "Rex!" Daniels shouted, giving chase. But the dog was already charging through the glass doors. Inside the courtroom, the judge had just begun reading the formal charges aloud when the doors slammed open. With a violent crash, a loud bark pierced the air. Panic broke out instantly. Several people ducked or screamed. The bailiffs jumped to their feet, hands on their weapons, unsure if it was an attack. Rex rushed past the shocked courtroom attendees, ignoring the yelling and confusion. His paws clicked loudly on the polished wood floor as he beelined directly toward the defense table. More specifically, toward the wooden bench behind which Calloway sat. Calloway jerked backward, startled, as Rex began barking furiously. He lowered his nose to the floor, then pawed furiously at the space beneath the bench. The room froze, every eye locked onto the dog. Judge Ramsey slammed his gavel repeatedly, but no one could hear him over the chaos. Bailiffs tried to pull Rex away, but the dog growled and resisted violently. Officer Daniels burst through the door moments later, breathless. "Don't touch him," Daniels shouted. "He's alerting." Those 2 words changed everything. Instantly, the courtroom was evacuated. Attorneys, witnesses, reporters, everyone filed out in a controlled frenzy. The judge and court staff followed protocol, exiting through side doors. Daniels called dispatch for the bomb squad. Within minutes, the building was under lockdown. Outside, the growing crowd of evacuees stood in disbelief, huddled near police barricades. Some whispered theories: was it a bomb, a stash of drugs, a concealed weapon? Others simply stared at the building, waiting for any answers. Calloway, still inside under heavy guard, remained curiously calm. He sat in silence, eyes cold, watching as officers surrounded the courtroom. There wasn't a hint of fear on his face. Daniel stayed with Rex, who stood stiff and alert, eyes still fixed on the courtroom door as if he could sense whatever danger still lingered inside. Captain Morris of the local precinct arrived to take command of the situation. After being briefed, he nodded solemnly. "If Rex is alerting, we treat this like a live threat," he said. "No exceptions." Meanwhile, bomb technicians began sweeping the courtroom. Daniels joined them, knowing Rex's alerts were not to be taken lightly. The dog had detected hidden narcotics under the dashboard of a suspect's car last year, even when the compartment was shielded with multiple layers of aluminum and odor-proof materials. He had sniffed out ammunition sealed inside waterproof packaging, buried under a false basement floor. This dog didn't make mistakes. Rex's alert behavior in the courtroom hadn't been minor. He had aggressively barked, pawed, and growled at the base of the defense bench. Something was there. The techs used cameras, infrared sensors, and specialized detectors to check every inch of the bench. At first, they found nothing, but as one of them tapped the floorboard with a fiber optic scope, it made a dull, hollow sound. "Hold on," the technician said. "We've got something." Peeling back the wooden panel with surgical precision, they uncovered a false bottom, a hidden compartment expertly built beneath the bench itself. Carefully removing the cover, they revealed a black duffel bag, tightly sealed with duct tape. The room went quiet. Bomb techs retreated, waiting for the remote-controlled robot to inspect the contents. The robot's arm extended, slicing the tape open. Inside, instead of explosives, were bricks of marked cash, multiple burner phones, into encrypted USB drives. Gasps rang out. Officers exchanged stunned looks. This wasn't random. This was organized, deliberate and dangerous. One of the officers radioed outside. No explosives found, but we've got a major discovery. It's a courier drop. Repeat, a courier drop has been found inside the courtroom. Back outside. Daniels leaned down and whispered to Rex, giving him a firm pat. Good boy. Damn good boy. Within the hour, the news broke across local media. A police K-9 had uncovered a hidden compartment inside a live courtroom. But what nobody could yet explain was, how had it gotten there? Who had placed it? And why had the dog reacted so strongly to it at that exact moment? One thing was clear: this was no ordinary courtroom drama. Something far deeper was unraveling, and it had only just begun. The courtroom had turned from a place of justice into a live crime scene. Officers with gloved hands and tight expressions moved around carefully, documenting every item found in the hidden compartment. Daniels kept Rex beside him. The dog's ears still perked, tail rigid. Rex hadn't relaxed, even after the duffel bag had been safely removed. That alone disturbed Daniels. What was it about that bench that still had his partner so tense? Outside, reporters were scrambling for information. The courthouse steps buzzed with camera flashes and whispers. Assistant DA Caroline Blake stood, with arms crossed, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had prosecuted Calloway for months, battling loopholes, mistrials, and endless delays. Now, it appeared something had been going on right under her nose inside the very courtroom she'd trust. Dia's sacred ground. Inside, the contents of the duffel bag were being processed. A total of $85,000 in bundled bills, wrapped in latex and sealed with electrical tape. 3 burner phones all wiped clean. 2 USB drives, both password protected and encrypted. At first glance, it looked like a dead drop money and data ready for pickup. But that begged a more troubling question. Who had placed it there? And who was supposed to retrieve it? Detectives began combing through the courtroom's maintenance logs. The bench had recently been repaired less than 3 weeks ago. A local carpenter had been brought in for what was reported as loose floorboards. That carpenter, however, had no business being inside a high-security courtroom unsupervised. Interviews were already being scheduled. Meanwhile, in a holding room, Nathan Calloway sat calm and uncuffed, arms resting on the table. To federal agents stood across from him. You knew what was under that bench, one agent said. Calloway smiled faintly, but said nothing. You didn't flinch when that dog ran in. Still, silence. The smug expression on Calloway's face wasn't just arrogance, it was confidence. He knew the room. He knew the system. And he seemed convinced that no matter what they found, nothing could be tied to him directly. Officer Daniels returned to his precinct briefly to review Rex's training logs. Over the years, the dog had logged over 300 successful searches, everything from narcotics to explosives, firearms, even human remains. Never once had he made a false alert. Rex didn't just bark for fun. When he alerted, something was always there. And yet, Daniels couldn't shake a thought nagging at him. Rex had remained on edge even after the duffel was removed. What else had he sensed? The bomb squad had declared the room safe, but Daniels trusted his partner more than any tech. He requested one more sweep. Rex obeyed his command without hesitation, entering the courtroom again. He sniffed along the walls, the podium, the chairs. Nothing. Then he circled back to the bench paused Dan sat. An alert sit. Daniels frowned. There was nothing left under it. The hidden compartment was empty now. Still, Rex was sure. Daniels dropped to one knee and inspected the frame. His flashlight flickered across the wood, illuminating fine scratches and what looked like hairline splits. Something didn't add up. He requested a full dismantling of the bench. An hour later, another discovery was made, this time hidden deep within the armrest. A tiny lens, no larger than a dime. It was a micro camera, tucked discreetly between the joints. Wires ran underneath and into the courtroom floor, disappearing beneath the tiles. It wasn't just a drop-off spot, it had been a surveillance hub. The feed was traced to a small external receiver found in the courthouse janitor's closet, concealed inside an unused vent panel, and the receiver had recorded months of courtroom activity, whispers, sidebars, even jury reactions. Someone had been watching and listening from inside the court. Judge Ramsey was immediately informed. My courtroom was bugged. He muttered in disbelief. This is a federal offense. The discovery changed the investigation's tone. This wasn't about a single bag of dirty money. This was about systemic infiltration surveillance of court proceedings, possibly aimed at manipulating verdicts or intimidating witnesses. Within hours, U.S. Marshals were brought in. The case shifted jurisdictions, and Nathan Calloway was no longer just a defendant. He was now suspected of orchestrating an operation that penetrated the inner sanctum of the legal system. Caroline Blake felt the weight of it all as she stood in the hallway, watching agents carry equipment from the courtroom. If the surveillance had been active during trial proceedings, every case that had taken place in that courtroom might now be compromised. Sentences might be appealed, trials might be overturned, and worst of all, witnesses who thought they were protected could have been exposed. That's when another piece fell into place. A tech expert found timestamp footage on the hidden receiver. One segment showed a court staffer entering the courtroom alone the night before Calloway's sentencing. It wasn't a janitor. It wasn't a carpenter. It was Rachel Henley, the senior court clerk. Rachel had worked for the courthouse for over 12 years, trusted, quiet, and methodical. She was known for her punctuality and low profile. But now, that footage showed her unlocking the courtroom door late at night, entering with a small bag, and walking toward the bench. Her expression was flat, focused, no hesitation. Caroline's heart dropped as she watched. Not her, not Rachel. The footage cut to black. Outside, as twilight fell, reporters continued their coverage. The story had gone national within hours. Headlines now read, "Police dog uncovers secret surveillance plot inside U.S. courtroom." The public wanted answers, so did the authorities, and all eyes were now on the woman who, until that moment, no one would have ever suspected. Rex stood quietly beside Daniels in the hallway, ears twitching at every sound. He had done his job. Now, the humans had to finish theirs. The Jefferson County Courthouse, once known for its peaceful routines and tight operations, now resembled a crime scene from a political thriller. By noon, national news trucks lined the block. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Police in tactical gear guarded the entrances while FBI agents stormed through hallways, once filled with quiet legal debates. Inside, murmurs and tension hung in the air like smoke. Officer Daniels stood quietly beside Rex, his K-9 partner, and the one who triggered it all. Rex sat alert, watching every agent that passed. He was no longer just a working dog. He was the reason an entire courthouse was under siege. Across the hallway, Assistant District Attorney Caroline Blake sat alone in an unused jury room, staring at the footage of Rachel Henley entering the courtroom. She replayed it 5 times, hoping the 6th time would make more sense. It didn't. Rachel had walked in calmly, swiped her badge at the security lock, and disappeared into the dark courtroom with a small bag. That bag matched the one the bomb SQAD had discovered. Rachel wasn't just involved. She was the courier. But why? Blake rose and walked to the door, just as an FBI agent entered. "We're bringing her in now," he said. "She hasn't said a word yet." Rachel Henley had been picked up from her home without resistance. She was found at her kitchen table, still in her work clothes, with a blank stare and a cup of cold coffee in her hand. No signs of panic, no attempt to flee, just quiet acceptance. Back at the courthouse, they placed her in interview room 3. The federal agents sat across from her, questions ready, cameras recording. "Rachel," the lead agent said calmly, "you've worked here for over a decade. You're respected, dependable, and trusted. So tell us, why did you plant that bag?" Rachel looked down. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice came out, steady. "My brother," she said quietly. "They had my brother." The room went still. Rachel explained that her younger brother, Dylan, had fallen into debt after gambling losses and addiction issues. He owed money to the wrong people who worked for or with Nathan Calloway's network. She tried to help him, even paid off some debts, but it wasn't enough. One day, a man had approached her in a parking lot. He knew where she lived, what route she drove, where her brother worked. The threats were clear. They said if I didn't cooperate, I'd never see him again, she whispered. She began by leaking case files, just minor updates at first, but it escalated quickly. Soon, she was passing full transcripts, jury rosters, witness statements. The surveillance equipment in the bench was the final step. "I didn't want to," she said, voice cracking, "but I didn't see another way out." Her confession stunned the agents. This wasn't a mole they'd found a desperate sister under blackmail, but the damage she caused was catastrophic. Courtroom audio, confidential files, even sealed case notes had been compromised. Meanwhile, Calloway sat smugly in a holding cell downstairs, utterly unfazed. It was clear he believed none of this could touch him, and for the moment, he was right. The materials in the duffel bag hadn't directly connected him yet. Rachel had been the mule, the silent insider. She had never met Calloway in person, only his intermediaries, unless more evidence emerged. His lawyers could argue plausible deniability. Still, the FBI wasn't done. They had launched coordinated raids across 3 cities, targeting known Calloway associates. Tech analysts dove into the encrypted USB drives found in the bench. One of them cracked after 14 hours, revealing spreadsheets detailing court calendars, plea deal notes, and surveillance logs, all formatted with timestamps and location data. But then came the breakthrough. One file contained a cache of recorded calls, voice memos recorded from inside the courtroom itself, picked up by the tiny camera's hidden microphone. Many of them were insignificant, but one stood out. A conversation between Calloway and his attorney. In the recording, Calloway says, "Rachel said the package is in place. She followed instructions. It was enough." The evidence now directly linked Calloway to the surveillance setup and the blackmail operation involving Rachel. With Rachel's signed confession and cooperation, the DA could file additional charges, this time for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and tampering with court proceedings. Caroline Blake felt both vindicated and heartbroken. Rachel had betrayed them, yes, but not out of greed or ideology. She was just a sister who made a terrible decision under terrifying pressure. But Calloway had orchestrated the entire web, using threats and fear to turn good people into pawns. By evening, the courtroom was formally declared compromised. Judge Ramsey issued an emergency order relocating all trials to a separate facility. Until full inspections could be completed, the bench was dismantled and boxed as evidence. Every courtroom in the county was now scheduled for sweeps. Outside, protesters had gathered, some demanding harsher penalties for Calloway, others demanding courtroom transparency. Signs read, "How deep does it go?" and "No justice without integrity." But amid the chaos, there was one symbol of unexpected heroism: Rex. Photos of the K9 circulated on social media with captions like "Hero Dog Saves Courtroom," and "He sniffed out corruption." Donations poured into the police K9 unit. Children left treats and toys outside the precinct. Officer Daniels had to field 3 interview requests before lunchtime. But the dog didn't care about the fame. Rex only reacted when Daniels opened the back of the squad car or said the word "work." To him, it was another mission completed. Yet Daniels knew it was more than that. Rex hadn't just sniffed out a hidden stash. He had uncovered a conspiracy that might have corrupted countless trials and endangered innocent lives. Daniels knelt beside his partner and scratched behind his ears. "You knew," he whispered, "before any of us did." Rex wagged his tail, eyes still scanning the perimeter, and in that moment, Daniels knew one thing for sure: justice didn't always wear a badge or carry a briefcase. Sometimes, it walked on 4 paws and barked when the truth was buried deep beneath the bench. A full week had passed since Rex's sudden courtroom alert changed everything. Jefferson County's courthouse was still shuttered for investigation, its courtrooms under forensic review, and every piece of evidence double-checked for tampering. The courthouse had gone from a temple of law to ground zero for a growing scandal. Detectives now focused on mapping the structure of Calloway's operation. The surveillance footage, combined with Rachel Henley's confession and Calloway's recorded voice, had revealed the shocking truth: this wasn't an isolated breach. This was a coordinated effort by a criminal organization to embed itself inside the justice system. The bench where Rex had first alerted had been taken apart entirely, and beneath the obvious false bottom that had concealed the duffel bag, forensic techs found something else: an even deeper hollow cavity, narrower, harder to reach, almost invisible. Inside that space, tucked into the side of the frame, was a secondary flash drive. It was thin, bent slightly, as if it had been hastily jammed into the compartment and forgotten. That small oversight turned out to be monumental. When encrypted, the drive contained dozens of video recordings, timestamped courtroom footage from trials over the last 6 months. But it wasn't just surveillance. It was annotated. There were notes, predictions, even profiles: who would likely vote guilty, which witnesses were vulnerable, what judges had patterns in sentencing. This was intel pure psychological data harvested from court proceedings. It wasn't just being gathered, it was being used. At the precinct, Ada Caroline Blake stood behind a monitor, watching the clips in horror. This isn't just spying, she said. They were shaping strategy based on it. They were manipulating trials. FBI agent Mark Ryder nodded grimly. This is organized judicial sabotage. We've never seen anything like it. More chilling than anything was how subtle the manipulation had been. Jury members had been seated based on patterns gleaned from prior cases. Witnesses who seemed unstable had their addresses leaked and received threats just enough to shake them, but not so much as to cause legal disruption. One key witness, an elderly man from a prior arms trafficking case, had died suddenly from a hit and run. That case, which had previously been ruled accidental, was now reopened under suspicion of premeditated silencing. They had uncovered a machine gun that took in courtroom behavior and churned out a roadmap to undermine justice. Meanwhile, Calloway remained largely unbothered. He'd been transferred to a federal holding facility where he kept to himself. He exercised daily, refused all interview requests, and made only one phone call to a lawyer in New Jersey who specialized in constitutional loopholes. The man had a reputation for keeping powerful criminals free on technicalities. But what Calloway hadn't expected was Rachel's willingness to cooperate fully. Once her brother Dylan was found alive and placed into federal protection, her fear melted into guilt. She gave investigators every detail she could remember: the voice of the man who delivered the surveillance devices, the text messages she'd deleted in panic, even the code phrases they used in public to avoid suspicion. She remembered one message in particular. It had said, "The bench isn't just where judgment sits, it's where it listens." The phrase became a chilling metaphor across the media. Detectives worked around the clock to track the man. Rachel identified the one who blackmailed her. Security footage from nearby buildings eventually led them to a name: Alex Vargo, a former systems engineer with ties to Eastern European cybercrime circles. He'd vanished 3 days before the bust. Now, he was on the FBI's most wanted list. But even as law enforcement widened the net, the emotional toll inside the courthouse deepened. Judge Ramsey held a private meeting with the district's senior judicial counsel. He expressed concerns about every verdict passed in that courtroom. Over the last 6 months, if any were compromised, it could unravel 100 lives, he said. The responsibility lies with us to repair the damage, even if that means reopening trials. The council voted unanimously to audit every case linked to Calloway or known affiliates. The process would take months, maybe longer. Families who thought justice had been served were now receiving notices that their cases would be re-examined. Tensions ran high. Some victims' families were outraged, believing the system had betrayed them. Others broke down in tears, terrified their attackers might walk free due to legal technicalities. Rachel's betrayal, no matter how reluctantly done, cast a long shadow, and yet, amid the chaos, something else began to rise: public admiration. For Rex, news programs played footage of the K-9 sitting alert in the courtroom. Children in schools wrote letters. One third-grade class sent in a hand-drawn picture labeled Rex, the Justice Dog. Fundraisers were launched to expand the K-9 unit statewide. What Rex had uncovered wasn't just a crime, it was a sickness. Inside the legal system, one he'd sniffed out with pure instinct. Officer Daniels didn't seek the spotlight, but he appreciated the recognition. He'd always known Rex was special. Now, the world did too. Back at the federal lab, forensic experts made one last breakthrough. On one of the encrypted drives, they found a message draft never sent, but written like instructions. It read, "Install second receiver under judge's bench. Jury mapping algorithm next. Phase 3 begins next quarter." No mistakes. The implications were terrifying. What they discovered wasn't the end of something, it was the middle. There had been more phases planned, more targets, more infiltration. Phase 3, what did that mean? Who was still involved? Caroline Blake stood in the war room, staring at a whiteboard covered in photos, maps, and court case files. They weren't just watching, she whispered. They were evolving, and thanks to Rex's bark, they'd stopped it for now. But the case was far from over. By the time the word Phase 3 reached the FBI's internal logs, the investigation officially escalated to a national-level threat. The Department of Justice had issued emergency security evaluations to every federal courthouse in the western region overnight. Dozens of courtrooms underwent deep sweeps. Surveillance devices were discovered in 3 other counties less advanced than the one in Jefferson, but enough to prove Calloway's network extended far beyond Colorado. What had started as a bizarre courtroom disturbance caused by a barking K9 had now become a multi-state intelligence operation. Inside Jefferson County's temporary legal HQ, a repurposed municipal building, under heavy guard, Ada Caroline Blake led daily briefings with federal task forces. They had already linked Alex Vargo, the surveillance expert who vanished, to several shell companies that had bid for courthouse tech contracts. One of them, Omnicrypt Systems, had once donated to the State Judicial Infrastructure Fund. The deeper they dug, the more alarming it got. This isn't just organized crime, Blake told the agents. This is infiltration. They were embedding themselves inside justice itself legally, surgically, invisibly. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels was back on patrol, but never far from the investigation. Every time he looked at Rex, he remembered how close they'd come to missing it all. If Rex hadn't barked, if that compartment had remained sealed, it might have been years before anyone discovered what was happening. Now, the question was, who was still inside? Rachel Henley's cooperation was invaluable, but even she didn't know the full scale. Her role had been limited to one courtroom. She never met Vargo. She never saw Calloway in person, but she remembered names burned into her memory. From late-night text messages and encrypted file names, one stood out. J. Bowman, she said in her statement. He was always CCD. The others deferred to him. It didn't take long for that name to raise alarms. Jonathan Bowman was a senior legal IT consultant contracted for courthouse infrastructure upgrades across 3 states. He had access to every piece of security software, remote login permissions, and had even trained judges and clerks on how to use digital case management tools. He was considered brilliant, efficient, unquestionably trusted, but as agents combed through Bowman's professional history, inconsistencies began to emerge. A prior company he worked for had gone bankrupt. Under investigation, a recommendation letter from a retired federal judge turned out to be forged, and his digital footprint was unusually sanitized for someone in his field. Almost like someone had scrubbed his past, they issued a subpoena for Bowman's online activity. What they found chilled them. He'd been in encrypted contact with an IP address traced to Eastern Europe, the same region Vargo's old tech ring operated from. In one exchange, dated 3 weeks before Rex's courtroom alert, Bowman sent a message. Delivery received. Phase 2 complete. Awaiting Phase 3 funding confirmation. Bench test was clean. Bench test. The phrase confirmed it. Bowman had been monitoring the Jefferson bench compartment, the one Rex had uncovered. He wasn't a technician. He was an architect. Federal agents moved quickly. Bowman, who had just checked into a hotel in Sacramento for a tech symposium, was arrested in the lobby. On his person, a hard drive labeled bench protocol and a flight itinerary to Singapore, scheduled for the next morning. When interrogated, Bowman said nothing, not a word. He lawyered up, demanded silence, and requested embassy contact. But forensic analysis of his hard drive made it clear this was far from over. Blueprints, schematics, names under Phase 3. One document listed a chilling new objective: remote court interference, evidence injection tools, high-based trial outcome forecasting. They weren't just listening anymore. They were preparing to shape outcomes, possibly even planning false evidence, or using algorithmic manipulation to influence jury selection and sentencing trends. Back in Jefferson County, the weight of the discovery left everyone breathless. Caroline Blake stared at the wall of evidence in her temporary office. Photos of Rachel, Bowman, Vargo, and Calloway were connected by red strings and yellow pins, but the connections were growing too complex for pins and photos. This wasn't a crime ring, it was a hybrid of tech, corruption, and legal warfare. And it was still active. Rex, ever calm, lay on the floor nearby. Daniels had brought him. Along that day, partially for morale, the room seemed to breathe easier with the dog inside. People who'd barely slept in days found comfort in the animal. Who'd exposed the first threat of the web? It was then, during one of the briefings, that something unexpected happened. A federal analyst burst into the room holding a printed screenshot. "We've got a live alert," she said, from an audio scanner set up in a courthouse basement in Phoenix. The audio had picked up a man muttering to himself inside an empty courtroom after hours. The voice said, "Phase 3 begins here. No dogs, no interruptions this time. Agents froze. Phase 3 was underway. In a matter of hours, federal marshals swept the Phoenix location. They found a new surveillance installation more advanced, more discreet than before. The hidden device was placed inside the railing near the witness box, coated in soundproofing resin and wired to a Wi-Fi relay embedded inside a fake wall outlet. But this time, they were in time. No data had been transferred. No trials had started. They had stopped it barely. That success only happened because of what Rex had discovered in Colorado. The ripple effect of one dog's instinct had thwarted a nationwide judicial breach. And yet, as Blake stared at the growing files and schematics, she knew they weren't done. Bowman didn't act alone. She said aloud, "There's still a coordinator out there. Someone higher. Someone we haven't seen." Daniels nodded. "And they're not finished." The team agreed to triple courtroom security protocols nationwide. Every upcoming trial would now undergo pre-sweep by K9 South and bomb techs. Every judge received threat assessment training. A new standard had been set, all thanks to one bark in one courtroom on an ordinary day that changed everything. While Bowman remained silent under federal custody, Rachel Henley sat alone in a white-walled interrogation room in Denver. Her hands trembled, and her eyes darted every time the door clicked. She had turned herself in, yet guilt clung to her like a second skin. Despite everything, investigators knew there was still more she hadn't said, things she was either too afraid or too ashamed to share. Caroline Blake entered the room quietly. She placed a steaming mug of tea on the table without speaking. Then she sat, her voice calm but direct. "Rachel, we need to talk about the messages you deleted." Rachel's eyes welled up, but she said nothing. Blake slid a folder across the table. Inside were recovered chat logs from an encrypted messaging app. Installed on Rachel's personal laptop chat she thought she had permanently wiped. The logs revealed a string of exchanges with someone using the handle The Quiet Advocate. The tone was professional, cold, and manipulative. "You followed every instruction," Blake said, "down to folding the bag a certain way. That wasn't just blackmail, Rachel. That was training." Rachel swallowed hard. Her voice cracked. "He told me they'd hurt my brother if I didn't. He sent a photo. He was tied to a chair. I didn't know where." Caroline leaned forward. "We found your brother. He's safe. He's been in a protection center under a different name. They lied to you." Rachel broke. Tears spilled over as she whispered, "I thought I was saving him. I thought if I stayed quiet, they let him go. I had no idea it was this big. I thought it was just drugs." "Rachel," Caroline said gently, "you weren't just a pawn. You were a key piece, and we need your help." What came next on the investigation team? Rachel described how she'd been recruited. It started subtly: anonymous job offers, mystery clients, encrypted emails. Then came the direct messages, court schedules, timing instructions, security codes. She was told to plug USB drives into evidence computers during off hours, to misfile certain motions, to ensure certain judges were scheduled for certain hearings. All seemed small, even meaningless at the time, but when Rachel identified the voice behind The Quiet Advocate, jaws dropped. It was someone they'd overlooked, someone who'd slipped through the cracks. Judge Robert Mallon. He was semi-retired, now working as a traveling judicial consultant for multiple jurisdictions. Known for his charisma and legal insight, Mallon had been lecturing at law schools and offering ethics training to court staff across the country. He'd even written a textbook on integrity in modern justice, but Rachel swore it was him. The voice, the phrasing, the way he once said, "Don't worry, justice doesn't need to be blind, just cooperative." Federal agents immediately pulled his travel records. They aligned perfectly. Mallon had been in Phoenix, Sacramento, and even Jefferson during critical dates tied to the bench surveillance operation. He'd billed the travel as consulting hours, and then came the smoking gun. One of Rachel's old USB drives, previously thought to be blank, was rescanned using advanced forensic recovery software. Buried deep inside was a documented draft contract, offering Mallon a 7-figure retainer for consulting services from a European registered tech corporation, Glaston Dynamics. Glaston Dynamics was a ghost company, one that had previously issued consulting payments to Vargo and had ties to overseas intelligence agencies. It all lined up. Mallon wasn't just consulting. He was orchestrating. The FBI's cyber division confirmed it. Mallon had been accessing private court databases using administrative override codes, reserved only for senior IT auditors with those credentials. He could monitor pending case filings, trial dates, even jury selections. He had the power to insert or erase evidence just as Rachel feared. He had positioned himself as an invisible hand behind the curtain of American justice. When a warrant was issued for his arrest, Malin vanished. His car was found abandoned outside a small airport in Nevada. A private aircraft manifest listed a Richard Mays departing the day before, an alias Malin had used on at least 3 occasions in past international travel. The trail had gone cold, but his blueprint remained. Dozens of digital fragments recovered from his consulting laptops pointed to what he called the mosaic. It was an ambitious, terrifying system and AI-assisted platform capable of analyzing court trends, emotional reactions of judges, and predicting the likelihood of a conviction. Malin's idea was to create a shadow influence network, control the data, guide the outcome, and it had already been tested. A handful of past verdicts were now under federal review, suspected of being manipulated by remote data insertions. Even worse, some of the verdicts appeared entirely legitimate. There was no detectable tampering, no smoking gun. That was the brilliance and the horror of the system. It was designed to be undetectable. Officer Daniels, hearing all this, looked at Rex with new respect. The dog's bark hadn't just revealed a crime, it had unearthed a revolution in corruption. Without him, Blake admitted, this would have stayed invisible. Now, Rachel Henley was preparing for a plea bargain in exchange for her full testimony against the network. Bowman, seeing Malin had abandoned him, began cracking too. In exchange for reduced charges, he admitted Malin had planned to sell the system to international buyers. The buyers weren't just interested in American justice. They wanted the code to influence their own court systems or possibly blackmail judges worldwide. It was no longer just about crime. It was about power. Still, Malin was gone, and no one knew where he was. But Blake had a hunch. She stared at the recovered schematics and a single hand-drawn diagram labeled Cascade. It was labeled with one word: Boston. The final phase might be underway, and Rex had only just scratched the surface. Boston's Logan International Airport hummed with the usual rhythm of travelers and distant announcements, but inside a hidden operations room beneath Terminal C, a high-stakes manhunt was quietly underway. Agents from the FBI and U.S. Marshals surrounded the room, eyes locked on monitors, scanning boarding logs and biometric scans. Caroline Blake stood at the center, arms crossed, heart pounding. All clues pointed to Malin being here or having just been here. 2 hours earlier, an encrypted server labeled Cascade was activated in a Boston condo near Back Bay. The signal was traced to a laptop registered to Glaston Dynamics. Blake's team raced there, but the condo had already been cleared out, wiped out with surgical precision. Still, one item remained on the bed, a printed photo of Rex, the K9, with the word scrawled beneath it in red ink. The system broke because of a dog. Malin was mocking them. Back in Jefferson, Daniels watched news coverage in stunned silence. Rex lay beside him, tail flicking. Daniels reached down to pet him, but his thoughts were far away. We pulled the curtain back, he whispered, and we're staring at a ghost. Rachel Henley had been transferred to protective custody in Boston. She would testify to a federal grand jury within 48 hours. Her cooperation had earned her partial immunity, though. The public might never forgive her. In the safe house, Rachel received an unmarked envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a simple flash drive and a note. This is the last piece. Tell them everything or we both disappear. Caroline reviewed the drive. What they found was staggering. The flash drive held video call footage between Malin and an unnamed buyer. The buyer, face obscured, spoke with a Russian accent. Wearing a Glaston Dynamics pin on their lapel, they discussed court cases in multiple countries, including encrypted data exchanges with judicial networks in Germany, Brazil, and Singapore. The buyer referenced Phase 3, which Malin had supposedly launched weeks before his disappearance. Malin was no longer selling influence, he was selling the architecture of judicial collapse. Cascade wasn't just about American courtrooms, it was a test. Boston's connection? A series of underground data lines linking private arbitration servers, often used by corporate attorneys to settle high-value disputes outside public courts. Malin had tapped into these channels, using them as backdoors. Through them, he could inject data, influence algorithms that predicted arbitration outcomes, and even tip settlement decisions. At worst, he'd been doing it for years. The agents realized Malin didn't need to stay in Boston. He just needed a pass-through to reroute his signal one final time. From there, he could vanish again. Caroline's eyes landed on a blinking red dot on their digital map, a private boat marina off the coast of Quincy, Massachusetts. One vessel had just set out without logging a departure. It was called the Mosaic. Within minutes, agents mobilized. By the time they reached the marina, the Mosaic had already vanished from radar. But all hope wasn't lost. Caroline made a bold call. She reached out to NSA contacts and requested satellite imaging from a defense satellite. Within 20 minutes, they had a thermal readout of a yacht moving south through Massachusetts Bay. They deployed Coast Guard intercept vessels and an unmarked tactical boat outfitted with jamming tech. As the federal team gave chase on the water, Caroline received a text from an unknown number. "If you reach me, you'll only find ash. Let it die." She ignored it. 40 miles offshore, just before the vessel crossed into international waters, it was spotted. The Mosaic slowed as the Coast Guard boat approached. A tense standoff began. The Mosaic's captain, an elderly man with no ID, claimed to be alone. The boat was searched, but Malin was nowhere aboard. Then Rex arrived. Caroline had insisted Daniels and Rex be flown in by chopper, suspecting Malin might have used scent masking tech. As soon as Rex set paw on deck, his nose twitched. He pulled hard toward the engine bay. There, behind a false bulkhead, was a concealed chamber, and inside it, barely breathing, was Robert Malin. He was disoriented, gaunt, and silent. They found a syringe beside him. Suicide attempt, perhaps, but he was alive. Back on land, news of his capture spread quickly. Malin was taken under maximum security, held in a classified federal facility. The trial would be closed to the public. Too many governments were involved now. Too many systems corrupted. But even as Malin was silenced, Cascade remained. Inside the Mosaic, agents recovered a single laptop still running. It contained code self-updating, self-replicating, and a list of pending court cases across 11 countries. Rachel Henley, upon seeing it, whispered, "It's not over." Daniels didn't disagree, and Rex, now seated next to a wall of digital forensics techs, barked sharply at one of the screens. The tech paused playback. The video slowed. In a corner of a surveillance clip from the Mosaic, a figure was visible, someone Malin had met before sailing. The man wore a glass and dynamics pin. His face was finally caught. He wasn't Russian. He was American, and he had once worked for the Department of Justice. Now the story had shifted again. Malin wasn't the architect. He was just one layer of something even deeper. The footage had everyone in the operations center frozen. There he was, tall, composed, stepping onto the Mosaic hours before departure. Malin had met him privately. Caroline Blake stared at the paused video, eyes narrowing. The man's face was finally in view, but something didn't sit right. She enlarged the image. Recognition hit like a slap. "That's Gregory Vaughn," she whispered. "Former DOI special counsel, retired 3 years ago." But he hadn't retired. He'd disappeared. A wave of silence spread across the room. Gregory Vaughn had once been a respected prosecutor, known for prosecuting organized crime in the 2000s. But after a failed investigation into government corruption ended in a scandal, Vaughn vanished from public view. No charges, no trial, no closure. He simply walked away. Now he was back in the shadows of a conspiracy that stretched across borders. The truth unraveled quickly. Vaughn hadn't just vanished, he'd been building something. Using his access, legal knowledge, and old intelligence contacts, he had quietly created an invisible infrastructure of influence. His aim was simple, not to destroy justice, but to own it. The operation called Cascade had always been his blueprint. Malin was just the operator. Vaughn was the architect. Daniel sat in stunned silence beside Rex, listening as Caroline briefed federal command. Rachel Henley, under heavy guard, was shown the enhanced photo of Vaughn. Her reaction was immediate. She dropped the tablet and backed away, shaking. "That's the man who gave me the first drive," she whispered. "I never knew his name." It all aligned. Vaughn had used Malin to test Cascade, Rachel to deliver the files, and the court system as a playground. His endgame, control the flow of global justice decisions. From case scheduling algorithms to judge assignments, his software could bend results without ever being noticed. Caroline knew this wasn't just a criminal case anymore. It was cyber warfare. They tracked Vaughn to a black site in Greenland, leased under a dummy corporation linked to Glaston Dynamics. By the time a joint U.S.-Danish operation stormed the compound, it was empty. Vaughn had vanished again, only a single monitor remained, looping the words, "Real power doesn't exist in courtrooms. It exists in what the courtroom never sees." But all wasn't lost. On a separate drive, found in Vaughn's abandoned server, were unlocked keys to every Cascade node left active in the U.S. The DOJ, NSA, and Homeland Security spent days deactivating them. Justice systems in multiple states were purged of the code. Judges who'd been unknowingly influenced were alerted, cases were reopened, and through it all, the story remained sealed, known only to a few. Daniels returned home a week later. Rex was officially retired with full honors. A formal ceremony was held in Washington, D.C., where the K-9 was awarded the Presidential Medal of Service, but Rex didn't understand medals. He only cared about the ball in Daniels' pocket. At the ceremony, Caroline approached Daniels quietly. "We're building a new task force," she said. "Cyber judicial threat response. I'd like you and Rex to consult." Daniels gave a tired smile. "He's more qualified than I am." In a separate courtroom this time in Virginia, a new trial began for Robert Mallon. He sat quietly, dressed in a plain suit, expression unreadable. Cameras weren't allowed. Witnesses were sealed. Only a handful of people even knew the real charges. Rachel Henley testified, this time without fear. She looked Mallon in the eye and said, "You thought the system was weak, but it only took one dog to bring it down." The judge, one not assigned by a corrupted algorithm, nodded. Slowly, but the world moved on. In quiet offices across Washington, security protocols were rewritten. Court benches across the country were scanned and reinstalled. I-based case assignment software was rebuilt from scratch. Transparency reforms passed in record time. Rex became a symbol, his face printed on t-shirts, lunchboxes, even coloring books. Children were taught not just to trust police dogs, but to understand how systems could fail if no one questioned them. 1 year later, Caroline sat in her new office, director of the Judicial Security Division. She received an envelope marked "For your eyes only." Inside, a photograph. Gregory Vaughn, seated in a Moroccan cafe, reading the newspaper, a timestamp, dated just 5 days earlier. There was no note, no fingerprints, just the image. Vaughn was alive and free. She slid the photo into a locked drawer. The war wasn't over, but at least now they knew what they were up against. Across the country, in a small park in Jefferson, Rex chased a ball under a blue sky. Children laughed nearby. Daniel sat on a bench, coffee in hand, quietly observing. People stopped to pet Rex, call him a hero, snap photos. None of them knew how close justice had come to disappearing. None of them knew how much had been saved by a single bark. And as Daniels looked out over the park, he smiled to himself, not because the story was over, but because someone like Rex had reminded the world that sometimes the most powerful alarm doesn't come from the system. It comes from a dog who refuses to be silent.